Hello again. Hey, Mitchell here. And this one right here, this is Ooga. Yesterday we had Booga that came to join us. Today we have Ooga. Again, I didn't name them. I just rescued them and they were named as they came. I mentioned that Booga might be maybe a little more forward, but you know what? They're now becoming both very affectionate, and maybe it's because I'm sitting here talking to myself. Um, but anyway, say hello to Ooga. And if you can't tell, she is just purring up a storm. She's vibrating like crazy here on my lap. But hey, I wanted to try something different today. Um, I've been, trying to connect with these different practices that I have, and they are phenomenal. A huge piece of, oh, there she goes. A huge piece of what I feel I have to offer is connecting the body with the entire mechanism. Seems like right now the big danger is that we're getting stuck in our heads, and our head is telling us what's happening, and our head only knows to look out there for what's going on. Um, I want us to start relying on our focus. Our focus brings us in. I really am suggesting to bring the focus into the solar plexus. If it rises to the heart, great, but start with your focus in the solar plexus. This is the power center, and this is actually uh, got a little bit more of a filter to it. It's going to say, hey, am I within my power, or am I having a power leakage, or am I out of my power? Whereas the heart is just going to be open to maybe uh, more than what we really need to be at this point. Let's start with the power and really generate something there. Okay, one sec. That was me pausing to get a tissue. Didn't want to sniffle the whole time. So anyway, look at my previous meditation videos and my previous videos where I talk about the different polyvagal toning and the different breath works, down regulating breath works. But I wanted to try something a little different today. I keep going back to some of these crazy visions I had back on a bike trip that I took in 1995. Okay, and during this time, I saw some things that didn't make sense at all. And the book that I'm referencing is called The Importance of Flying. And just to give you a brief overview, maybe spoilers, but hey, with all six of my listeners, whoop dee dee. I It sort of centers around this experience where I came into Ogden after being on my bike for several weeks, riding through desert, from the Northwest, from Seattle on down into, I was in the Utah part of my trip. And I'm in an alleyway in a totally abandoned part of town. And this guy shows up. And I thought he was there to kill me, to be honest with you, to start with. Um, but anyway, he was a Native American shaman. Said he had been looking for me or had been expecting me. And I had a very fascinating experience with him. It was a Kundalini awakening triggered by our encounter. And I had been having very otherworldly experiences throughout this time. And then after my encounter with this shaman in the alleyway and the Kundalini fully opening, I'd had like these partial openings throughout. And in the book at the time, back in 95, I had no idea what was going on. I thought I really honestly at the time thought I was having a mental breakdown. It was hugely uncomfortable. Not something that I had the ability to process. I didn't have the tools to process the language or the education to process what was happening. But I just kind of followed it. And about 20 years ago, back in 2007, that's 18 years ago now. Yeah. I wrote most of it down, of most of the trip. And then just this year, I finally got around to publishing it. It's available on Barnes and Noble and Ingram Sparks and Amazon, wherever you want to get it. I would love for you to get it. It's called The Importance of Flying. But I wanted to read bits and pieces from it because it is. I'm keep coming back to what's happening today is what I was seeing back then. And, at that time, I went and started this thing called the Institute for Conscious Culture. I thought we were going to build a whole new society, all new, towns, technologies, sustainable, appropriate technologies, all these things. I did deep dives into that. After the bike trip, I did fall into a fascinating internship with this crazy old yogi who their primary motivation for doing yoga, and this was a yogi from the 60s, they brought Iyengar yoga to the States. And they were into the Sanskrit and they were into translating all the Sanskrit texts. And so every day we would do the asana, which most people think of as the yoga. It's the yoga poses, but we would do the asana in order to get that out of the way so that we could do the meditations. We would chant all of the different texts. We chanted the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali every single day for months in Sanskrit. Okay, and then we chanted the Bhagavad Gita throughout in Sanskrit. And all that was part of just the toning part. And then we did all of the pranayamas. And this was in the early 90s. Well, it was after the bike trip, so it would have been the mid 90s. And there wasn't a lot available. It was hardbound books from obscure authors. Well, Iyengar, The Light on Pranayama, was really the Bible of pranayama back in the day, but very little else. But we read things like the Atha Yoga Pradipika, which who reads that, right? In Sanskrit. We did the Samkhya, right? What is that? We did all of the Upanishads in Sanskrit, crazy cool stuff. We spent hours and hours and hours in meditation. Anyway, that's how I got, and then actually shortly after that, I got on with another internship, or maybe it was an understudy. Actually, with the yogi, it was more of an understudy because I spent like 5 hours a day for 5 days a week with this person for, the next 5 years, 5. Anyway, but I started working with a shaman as an intern, and I got to put language and experience and background to what had happened on this bike trip, and then it gave me context, and I've been able to backfill since then. Anyway, 10 minutes into this, and I'm just giving you an introduction. What I wanted to do was read a little bit of what I had seen because it relates so well to what's going on now. I've been talking a lot about get out of fear and come into yourself. Find here what is true for you here and build it from within rather than taking what's out there and allowing that to freak you out, cause you to, retreat, come in, or reject what your power is. Because don't let that supplant your personal vision, okay? So let me give you this. I'm going to start with this is earlier before the encounter that I mentioned with the shaman in the alley. Or no, this is actually a dream I had. So, in mere days, so much had changed. I had stepped into reality and it was nothing like I had been taught. I still had the momentum of a lifetime to turn around. Almost everything I saw was witnessed from multiple perspectives. There was the way I had been conditioned to see things, and there was a new way, a way that saw everything as new and fresh and far more real, a way that was curious and excited and questioned everything. And that is that place from within where we create what we want to experience. The past few days had piqued my awareness of the extensive scope of the human being. I was reminded that I was the same vast consciousness I had fully experienced those many years ago as a 13-year-old falling down the glacier. And that's in the book. I have this experience when I'm 13 years old where I have an out-of-body experience. It's like a near-death experience where I become just vast consciousness and I am removed from my body as my body sits there in, this near death experience. And I'm out here wandering around looking at everything and nothing is urgent while the body is like falling off a mountain, heading to the sharp, jagged rocks at the bottom of a waterfall. You'll have to read the book to see how that turns out. Anyway, what came to me here in these mountains was no less than a comprehensive response to signals I was sending out. My requests were simple and small: directions or a meal. But the network of intricate logistics required to connect a person or object with this little physical component who was in need in space and time was mind boggling. The true purpose of this journey was to trust in a fuller, almost mythical rendition of what humanity could be. That's the purpose of the journey we're on right now, okay? With a very split perspective, I was back on pavement, back in reach of food stores and amenities. The rawness and solitude of the mountains had put me in touch with a primitive, instinctual, intuitive part of me of which I had little knowledge. Much of me wanted to stay in solitude and learn more about this aspect of myself, the one who could travel through the wilderness on trust alone. This was the path to the peaceful inner person I was searching for, but another part of me wanted to push the boundaries of what I had just experienced. So that was kind of a precursor to where I'm going now. And then this is a follow-up experience. Anyway, this is a dream, but I felt like that encapsulates where we are right now. We are on the verge of exploring who we really are. The environment is saying, you know what, we're not going to make it easy for you. We're not going to keep giving you comforts. We're going to step back. The environment is saying this. We're going to step back and cause you to find your own power. Okay? Look back at my meditations, and if you want specific power meditations, request it in the comments below. Okay? So here's another part, and then I'm going to jump to another part. Well, let's just see here. I'm on my computer and I'm kind of jumping around. Let me just read from here. Enveloped in the scent of sagebrush and under the light of a headlamp, I set up my bivy tent and made a celebratory dinner of noodles and tuna, the first meal in my once forgotten home. So this is, I had arrived in an amazing canyon. For me, my first experience there in southwest Utah. And I had this really strong sense that I had come home. And this is after I had been pulled into this canyon, and I walked around, and this was after coming out of the canyon and coming back to my campsite. Oh, I've got Ooga coming back. Okay, here she is. Is this Ooga? So Ooga and Booga are almost identical. Ooga does not have a kink in her tail. And yesterday you can see Booga, who does have a kink in her tail. All right. Ooga's getting crazy lovey again. Technically, I had never been here, at least in my present state, but the feeling of having lived entire lives in this place had entered at bone level the moment I arrived. That night I fell into a deep slumber and into another world entirely. On the horizon, this is my dream, on the horizon, a city of tall buildings, dark and imposing, was asleep. This is key. As soon as I walked, soon I was walking on dirty, vacant streets, down trash-lined alleyways. I had come into the city the back way, a returning dignitary, unrecognized and, due to the length of my absence, forgotten. Okay, and this is consciousness that I'm alluding to, the absence. I produced a didgeridoo-sized flute. And so back to my encounter with the shaman in the alleyway, he'd given me a flute. I was like, well, he played the flute for me, and then he told me all these things, and he gave me the flute, and I was like, you know what, I don't play the flute. And he says, oh, yes, you do. He says, this is yours. You've only forgotten. And then I have this dream several days later. I produced a didgeridoo-sized flute-like instrument and started playing. People materialized from all around and gathered to listen. The tones from my instrument became visible as colored light, and the notes were deep and long and caused the ground under and around us all to undulate and take on shapes and colors. In spontaneous response, those gathered produced their own instruments, instruments they too had forgotten they owned, but in an instant remembered how to play. Together, our tones and their colored emanations created an entire landscape. Everyone fell in a line and started walking to create a great moving circle, and within the circle, the city began to awaken. The ground underneath us danced with motion and light, glowing blue and sparkling like a star in the heavens. Continuing to play our instruments, we spiraled into the center of the now bright floating city, where we gathered in a large grassy park. The music and light continued without our playing. I stood there with a few cherished friends, and we all shared in the vibrating light of pure joy. So, fascinating dream 30 years ago. 30 years ago! 1995 was when this bike trip was. But I see it happening. I'm feeling this in my bones, okay? I could go on. Let's see here. Where are we? Yeah. So the next day, I woke up and that dream was buzzing within me. And like I mentioned in that alleyway a few days prior, this shaman had created, it felt like an electric spark in me where I was like literally electrocuted. And it was, as I look back, was a Kundalini awakening experience. So I was having, during this second part of my trip, I was having these extremely pleasurable but unfamiliar experiences where my entire body would be buzzing, and it would be from like the base of my skull to my sacrum, and it would be like something was vibrating up and down my spine. And anyway, it kind of caused me to do a lot of things purely on intuition rather than thinking, because I wasn't in my thinking mind when these vibrations were occurring. I was in a very energetically aware state. And so I was in a very intuitional place. And so I was doing things that I didn't have control. I didn't want to control with my mind. I didn't have the need for rational, checks and balances. I was doing what I was being led to do. Anyway, I get up and um, there was a coyote there, and the coyote had been there the night before and led me into the canyon. And this coyote was there again, and there's these huge sagebrushes, and I could only see its, these eyes looking at me through the sagebrushes, but they weren't like mean eyes. They were like curious eyes, or like hi. They were very they were eyes that I recognized. It was a fascinating experience where the coyote would be staring at me, and I would like notice this, totally silent being, and then I'd see these eyes. I'm like, whoa, there's something in these huge sagebrushes staring at me, and I would get up and I followed it, and it would turn around, kind of like, hey, are you following me? And then it would go, and then it would stop and turn around, then it would keep going. Anyway, I got led to this um, place in this canyon where there was these crazy petroglyphs, and there was this petroglyph of like what looked like a spaceman. Okay. Anyway, above these petroglyphs was this cave up in the rock face, and somehow somehow I managed to climb up there. I had been on my bike. I only had tivas and bike clothes, so it's 100 degrees in the summer. And I climbed up into this little cave, and here's what happened in the cave. uh, Barely conscious that I was doing so, I began to climb up to this little cave. At one point, as I tried to navigate an overhang, I looked down and realized I was not well equipped for what I was doing. I kept on anyway and made it to the cave, where I sat cross legged in the shade on the still, cool rock. I looked out across the canyon to the red rocks on the other side. The silence was fragile as snowflakes. But more than silence, there was an enduring stillness that seeped into everything it came in contact with. My bones felt the summoning of ageless wisdom in the vermilion and orange rock as it traveled through my skin, reconnecting me to an ancestral oneness forgotten in our age. I followed the feeling and dropped into a deep trance-like reverie. A bee buzzed into the cave and sat next to me on the rock. When he buzzed in this mini amphitheater, the sound was the only thing in the world until he settled back on the rock. I watched, entranced, for several minutes as he buzzed around in tight circles, landed, and took off over and over again. All else faded with the intensity of my focus on the bee. Then the bee rose, flew in a tight circle just in front of me, then took off like a shot. In that same instant, I stood and, without thought, leapt, following the bee within inches, flying out over the canyon. We soared high enough to see the dark crimson spires in the distance, then down, nearly grazing the earth. We skimmed the fine rock ridges that contoured the massive bowl on the floor of the canyon, flying on the illusionary air current they created. We flew not so much in ecstasy, but in acknowledgement. The bee led me to the mouth of the canyon, where my bike and tent sat. Only my bike and tent were not there. The giant sagebrush was also gone, and in its place was a broad river. Deep, fast water flowed where my things should be. There, hovering atop the shimmering stream, was an odd, beautiful individual was the odd, beautiful individual I had seen in the petroglyph. The bee departed, and I flew over and joined the strange yet familiar looking man. As with the prayer rock at Olivia's RV park on the Olympic Peninsula, so this entire trip had these crazy experiences I managed to stay on a Native American reservation in the Olympic Peninsula with the keeper of the of their prayer rock, their tribe's holiest entity, and that is one of the earlier chapters. Fascinating experience, but that's what that is. Uh, at Olivia's RV park, as with the prayer rock at Olivia's RV park on the Olympic Peninsula, a communication occurred. This time, however, my questions weren't personal. In fact, even I had little knowledge of the nature of the questions because they were coming through me from a source my conscious mind was unfamiliar with. Volumes were relayed, images, foreign yet familiar, passed before me, awakening memories and sparking new ideas in subconscious realms. Together we peered into dozens of different dimensions, all occurring simultaneously, where I saw potential pasts and futures in a multitude of formats, unfamiliar to my usual way of perceiving. Then we went to a city, a blue, glowing city, the same as in my dream. As we hovered above the city, the petroglyph man imparted more, and when I felt full to bursting, still more came. Everything was absorbed into my being, although very little made sense to my watching consciousness. Then, in an instant, everything disappeared. I popped into a realm far different than any I recalled experiencing. All of my senses merged into one with the predominant expression of pure, lucid whiteness. I felt bodiless in an impenetrable silence, floating in a field of translucent purity. All care and thought disappeared without trace. The moment I recognized myself as having an experience, the ethereal purity disappeared. In a blink, I was back at the canyon mouth, hovering with the petroglyph man. In another blink, I was in the cave. The buzzing was back. Uh, my chin was on my chest, and I was still sitting cross-legged. The vibration in my spine was so strong I could hear it. The two bees now sat next to me. I glanced over, and they took flight, leaving me alone. I had no idea how much time had transpired, but the sun had made considerable progress toward the zenith of the sky. The now sunlit cave was hot. I dragged myself back into the cool shade, unable to uncross my numb, unresponsive legs. They were wooden posts, and it took several minutes to straighten them out, and several minutes beyond that for the stinging and tingling to wear off. Whatever it was that had just occurred, anyway, I kind of go on to describe a little bit of the physical entry into my body. But the point here is we are experiencing this awakening into something that we can't even fully conceive. And just as in the dream and in the vision, it wasn't up to me to understand it at all. It wasn't up to us to intellectually put names, identifications, labels to any of it. It was up to me just to hold the vision. And the vision could be as abstract as this blue glowing city of light where we are in absolute um, uh, unity with our empowered selves. Okay. I know this has been a bit longer. It's been a bit odd. I hope you've enjoyed it. And you know what? It's what I see. You know, when I'm looking out there, it's like in the beginning of that dream when I come into what felt like a deserted, trashy old city. But it just takes a little bit of awakening, a little bit of coming in here rather than focusing out there, and finding the vision that is true for us, all of us. Okay, I feel like it's been dumped into the planet. My experience is probably one of millions across the board. I don't know how many other people have had similar visions, similar experiences who have brought this energy in. We've all been doing it, in our own ways over the past several decades. And now is the time that we're actually experiencing this waking up. Boy, I've rambled on longer than my usual time, so I think I'm going to kind of cut it off here. My book is available on, like I said, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Ingram Sparks. It's called The Importance of Flying, with the subtitle A Spiritual Odyssey. Love for you to get it and give me some comments. Anyway, like, subscribe, and tell your friends. Start coming in, okay? Bye-bye.